So here we are then at the Prince of Wales for a brand new musical called Cliff the Musical, and I'm joined by the star, Mike Reid. Lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, and you, well, thanks for coming.
I've got to make a point, first of all. I don't like interviewing other broadcasters because you know where I'm going wrong, and if you just wouldn't look when I make a mistake, or if you wouldn't say anything, I'd be much obliged because you'll make me feel inadequate.
Well, in actual fact, the very first live interview I went to do when I started on radio was with Southside Johnny of Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, friends of Bruce Springsteen. And I got backstage to do the interview, and, you know, sod's law, the machine, my Ewer machine, wouldn't work. And I went the colour of a pillar box. I mean, I'm so sorry. And I said, hey, listen, no problem. And he got a screwdriver and he spent half an hour fixing my machine so I could do the interview. And I thought that was so nice of him. And for me, that was the blueprint. And I thought if anyone has any trouble with equipment, he was so nice to me that I was saying, oh, don't worry, it'll be all right, it'll be fine. You
see, the great thing with digital technology is we do the interview and then at the end I realise it hasn't worked, so we have to do it all again.
Good. Okay. Well, let's start again.
It's a real pleasure to talk to you. And I saw the show last night, Cliff the Musical, which, without question, I think is going to be a success because I don't go by my opinion or the journalists, because we've proved on this program they get it wrong show after show after show. We Will Rock You is the best example of a show that is hated by the press. They've given it -stars. It sells out every night, and it's an amazing show. And this, I think, will be exactly the same because the crowd just love it. Congratulations.
Well, thanks. Yes, it is. You know, the main critics are the people that buy the tickets. The main critics aren't the newspaper critics because they can only criticise it once. You know, if it's a bad crit, they're not going to come back next week and the week after and the week after to do it again. It's one criticism and it's gone. And very often, you know, they're arty and stuff like that. They can say something is absolutely wonderful. 8 people go and see it and it doesn't make any money, and therefore, you know, it doesn't help the business one iota. I mean, it's my 8th musical, and I would love, sure, some of my worthier pieces, let's say, you know, on Oscar Wilde or John Betjeman or Rupert Brooke or the 2 Dickens musicals I've done, to be in London. Nobody has asked me to bring them to London, but they've asked this one to be in London, and yet this is the one that is least brain surgery out of the lot.
It is interesting to look at Broadway and the West End at the moment, because I think I was talking to a producer last night about how a show gets into the West End at the moment. It seems that there has to be a star, either a star in it or the show has to be the star, i.e. Cliff Richard, Queen, ABBA. There's really no room now for shows that are about nothing but could be great shows.
You're absolutely right. I mean, certainly in the 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, Rodgers and Hammerstein's, Lerner and Lowe's could write a great new show. And it will be a great new show and accepted as such. I think the tolerance levels are certainly different now. You know, the retention levels, everything. It's got to be almost, we're so soaped up in our society that it's got to be quick cut. Don't make that scene too long. We're getting near the end. Let's make it fast. Let's make it punchy. Cut that. They won't like that. You know, they won't sit through that. And I think, sadly, that's the way it's going. One of the new musicals I've written a big new musical on The Prince and the Pauper with my namesake Michael Reid, and Michael was the MD for all Andrew Lloyd Webber's musicals from Phantom through to Whistle. Michael and myself are friends and always wanted to work together, and we've done this big new musical on The Prince and the Pauper, which we love, 16 big new songs, and yeah, it's difficult to get away because it's difficult to get someone to sit down and listen to 16 new songs over and over again till they're in their head and say, yes, we think this is a great big new musical. You know, if we'd written it in the 50s or the 60s, fantastic, but now it's like, yeah, it's brilliant, and so what, you know?
I think we've learnt on this programme one of the big problems is the money side of it now. It's a huge business, and I noticed looking at Broadway at the moment, the recent Michael Crawford show, which we all thought was bound to be a success because it had Michael in it, closed losing $5 million. Huge amounts of money are invested in these shows, as is in this show, I'm sure. What kind of stress does that put on you as a star and the producer and the person who's making it and putting it on?
I think you sort of have to ignore that and get on with what you're doing. I mean, if you were a footballer and your team was mightily in debt and you were struggling with relegation, I don't think you want to take that onto the pitch with you. You still want to go out onto the pitch and do your best and score goals and things like that. So I think that's really the same with this. So you don't really take the pressure out on stage. The best way you can help is by doing your best at what you do rather than worrying about somebody else's side of it.
As I say, there are so many great shows, and that's what this show is about. It's aside from all the bad side of the theatre world that we're learning about during the making of this programme. And there are so many great shows, and I'm sure this is going to be a success for one reason, Cliff Richard. He is amazingly popular, and his fans, I don't want to use the word obsessed because that has negative connotations, but they are fanatical at the very least, aren't they?
Yeah, they are certainly devoted. I mean, 2 fans that were outside the stage door at Sunderland, amongst a lot of others, it has to be said, said, "Oh, we love the show, we're coming back soon," and they were just off to catch a plane to Bangkok to see Cliff in Bangkok. So heaven knows how much money they must spend. I mean, a lot of the fans have been 6, 7, 8 times to see this show, and it's not even Cliff in it. And we thought, well, if the Cliff fans don't take to it, if they take against it, we're in trouble. But fortunately, they like it, and I guess it works because we suspend belief, as in a good radio play or a good musical. You're suspending belief. And I remember one night recently, something was happening, and this girl went, "I love you, Cliff." And I thought, that's great, because she has totally suspended belief. And it reminded me of a play I once went to see, the Yvonne Arnaud, where this guy had the girl in his arms and a knife behind her back, and some woman in the front row was so keyed up. She said, look out, he's got a knife. And of course, the place just erupted. But in some ways, that's good, because they're right there in the action.
This is a real fun show as well. It's quite funny, and you've obviously spent a lot of time working on that. And the audience, I always ask to sit at the back so I can see the reaction, and the nodding heads is always a good sign, and the laughing and stuff like that. Did you particularly want to do that and make it more of a story opposed to just a chain of Cliff songs?
Yeah, I said, when I was asked to write it, I said I couldn't make it chronological because people would know what's coming. That would be boring. Biographical wouldn't be that interesting. I talked to Cliff about it, and he said, well, what would you say? I haven't led a sort of like a really terrible life. There haven't been 3 divorces and 6 murders and things like that. So what would you put in it? So I said, well, actually, we'll make it humorous, but it's not the cutting edge humor. I mean, a couple of the press sometimes said, oh, it's a bit a little bit sort of corny or pathetic jokes or whatever. But Cliff's style of humor is very much that. I mean, he said some of the same things over the years. He'll go on stage, as he has done for 25 years, and say, every now and then a terrific song comes along, but until it does, I'll do one of Hank's. And the audience laugh every time. But he says the same thing. He's been saying it for 25 or 30 years, and it's still working. So his style of humor is that sort of, self-deprecating arrogance in a way, which sounds a bit of a paradox, where he jokingly says, if somebody said, who's the greatest rock and roll singer in the world? He'd go, it's me. But in such a way that he's taking the mickey out of himself. And I've sort of, really done that. I mean, there's a bit earlier on, exactly that, where Welch, who plays the butler in this, said we were looking for a new Elvis, and I, as Cliff say, and in 1958 they found him. It was me. But in a jokey way, like he means it, but he's also setting himself up, so it's on 2 levels.
It is an inoffensive show, and I think the people who want to come and see it, I mean, it's rightly aimed. I mean, the people don't want Eddie Izzard humour. They don't want Graham Norton doing the F word left, right and centre. I mean, it's perfectly aimed at the demographic that this is written for, isn't it? There's no point doing challenging stuff in it because they're just going to walk out.
Exactly. There's no point in trying to be clever, trying to be smart. And a couple of things that I did put in earlier on, I whipped out. I thought, they're not working. They're just not working for this audience. So you're actually tailoring it for your audience. And it's fine if the critics say, oh, please. But if you aim it above their heads, you're not going to get people in. If you aim it at ground level or, at the sort of, stand-up comedy humour, it's not going to work either. So you have to write. I don't understand why journalists and critics don't understand that, because under their editor, they have to write for their readers. If they were writing something that their readers couldn't understand or didn't want, the editor would be down on them. And surely they're bright enough to realise that if I wrote something that didn't work for the audience, the director would say, here, come on, what are you doing?
I think it's very obvious that the people that are writing for these newspapers are not thinking about the average person. They're writing for whether it be the bourgeoisie, middle, upper classes, whatever. The people that go in these shows are the people that I regard as the opinion of whether it's good or not, because they're the people that are buying the ticket. And it's very expensive to see a show. If it's bad, they won't come back and they won't tell people it's good. So I always go by their opinion. As I say, a lot of the shows that are running now that are selling out every night get no credit at all, and they should. And shows that we've talked to at Christmas have closed because of stuff that the press have said. said, it's very unfair, but I suppose that's life, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, I reckon the best yardstick, I always say, is probably in the ladies' toilet. Not that I've ever been in there, of course, but you know, we always say to people, you know, just go in and hang around, because that's where you hear all the real comments. You know, after a first night, of course, your friends come up and slap your back and say, great, exciting show, you know, full of energy, very good, very colourful, or whatever else they say. And you're never quite sure, of course, because if I went, as I have been to someone else's first night, you're not going to say, I hated that. You know, of course you're going to be nice the first night, and everyone's going to be nice about it. But I think the real acid test, the real old grey whistle test, is in the ladies' loo, where you hear somebody saying, oh, don't like this, or, oh, isn't it wonderful? And my mother came to one of the shows in Manchester. Of course, nobody knew who she was, but afterwards she told me everything that everyone had been saying all around her and in the bar during the interval. She said everyone was raving about it. So, I mean, they would to you if you've written it, but when they're doing it away from you, behind your back, then that's good.
It's the ultimate test. I mean, it's a high-energy show. It's a fun show. It's a bright show. It's got Cliff attached. I mean, it's going to be a success with the people who love Cliff for a start. I think it's a great show. Let's talk a little bit about you, because your background was in radio. That's where a lot of people know you from. What do you think of radio today? Is it any good?
It depends on the station, really. And I think it depends on the ownership. A lot of the commercial stations now are owned by corporates, and they paint them in their own colours. They insist that disc jockeys do what they're told, play what they're told. They're replaced if they don't want to toe the company line.
Sorry, Mike, could you keep your answer under 30 seconds?
Sorry?
Keep your answer under 30 seconds.
Really?
You see, we've got to keep the clock, you see. This is BBC. We're all right, aren't we?
Right.
That's
yeah, that's a good one. The corporates really... you know, they want you to play what you're told to play. If you overstep the mark, they say, we'll get someone else, or we'll get someone cheaper. And the big names they can replace with cheaper people that will just push buttons. And I really despise what they're doing to British radio, that by and large, in 9 out of 10 cases, the disc jockey can't get involved with the music. They're passionate about the music. A lot of them know about the music, but they can't get involved to any extent. When I was at Radio 1 during the breakfast show, I was able to go and see bands, put my own program together. So I came in the following day thinking, this is great. I can't wait to play these records. I was passionate about it. But subsequently, I've been at stations where you go, do I have to play this again? We played it yesterday and the day before and the day before. And unless you do what you're told, you're out. So I think the state of British radio is pretty bad. It's not good for new artists. Then record companies know exactly what they can sell and what they can't sell. So they don't sign any bands that radio stations aren't going to play. And the whole situation, I think, is up its backside, because all the record companies now say, this is going to be a hit, and we know that's going to be a hit, because they've got all their marketing strategy planned beforehand. So that excitement that rock and roll was founded on was like, okay, son, like your record, yeah? You're going to put it out? Yeah. You know, the excitement of a record coming out. Somebody's played it. Somebody else has played it. It's gone in the chart. It's 81. It's 75. It's in the top 40. That excitement is wonderful. And of course, when you've got a build of 10, 12, 15 weeks of a record climbing the chart, it was great for the writers, because the Performing Rights Society paid up. They earn money. Now a record's marketed at number 4 and drops like a stone. And also you get record companies dropping artists who sold 500,000 albums because it's deemed to be unsuccessful. And also they're having to pay to heavily market in order to get stuff into the shops. I mean, I've got an album out at the moment, and the record company said, no way we can get it into Woolworths, because they say, how much you're spending on it? What's your spend? 250,000, 500,000? Well, no, actually it's not. How many TVs have you got? If you're not spending 500,000, you've got some TVs, we won't touch it, full stop. Yeah. Bad news.
I remember listening to people like you and Blackburn and Steve Wright, and it was showbiz in those days, and there were stars of radio. There really aren't any stars now outside of Radio 1 or Radio 2, and I find that interesting. Even locally, there's very few people who you can admire now in radio. It's almost become a mock medium, I find, that there's no glamour anymore in it, really.
No, it's quite different now. There is no glamour, and also they don't want stars anymore. These big people that own the the GWRs and people like that, they don't want stars. They don't want anyone bigger than the station. I remember at GWR they were going to do a series of CDs, golden greats from yesteryear and what have you. And DLT and myself were there at the time, and they did this survey, and they found that my name and David Lee Travis' name were much bigger marketing brands than GWR's gold stations around the country were. That far more people knew of us than knew of them. So the marketing company came back and said, we suggest you use Mike and Dave for the branding rather than your station. And they hated that because they don't like anyone being bigger than the station.
It is incredible, and I thank you for everything I learned from listening to you and people like you, because, as I say, in those days there was a glamour about radio, and it was exciting. There's nobody particularly now I want to switch on to listen to, and in those days, you know, with yourself and DLT, Sunday mid-morning you listened to DLT, didn't you? Do you know what I mean? And there's nobody like that really now, is there?
No, there's not, and it was fun then. You could come up with ideas. I used to go in early. I used to look forward to it, and we had fun. I mean, we had weeks away, and I remember going in and, I said, what about doing 3 Men in a Boat on the Thames? Yeah. And within a day, we got it sorted out. Noel Edmonds, Gambaccini, and myself, Noel's dog, from Hampton Court to Oxford. It's great. It was fun. It was
3 words,
exciting.
Health and safety. I mean, it's in my contract. We can't have fun.
Oh, absolutely not. And the great thing was that our boss at Radio 1, Doreen Davis, her door was always open. After the programme, I'd wander in, have a cup of tea. She said, got any ideas? What do you think? Anything going on? Well, now you wouldn't get to see a boss mainly unless you were discussing your contract. And if the boss asked to see you, you'd be worried. You'd think, whoops. And or the secretary phones and says, he's got a window on Thursday a week. He'd like to see you. And you go, oh, is the contract up? But it wasn't like that then. I think the fun's gone out of radio, as the fun has gone out of the record industry. I remember when I was researching one book, somebody from EMI, and this, of course, wouldn't happen now because the band is signed, they know it's going to be successful.
And you really don't have to sell any singles to get to number one now, really, do you? I mean, the percentage, I think less than 1% of the population actually buy records now, and of which you only have to sell a couple of hundred to get to number one.
You have very, very few to get to number one. Also, our exports in the 60s, certainly in 64, 65, 66, 67, 80% of our records exported into the American charts. In the 80s, it was about 18%. It's now less than 1%, which is absolutely frightening. But there's a saying about the fun aspect. I remember Kenny Lynch, who had a deal with EMI. They discovered his Mountain of Love had gone into the charts, and somebody at EMI said, who's this guy, Kenny? He's one of ours. He's gone into the charts. Well, where is he? Somebody said, I think he's got a pitch on Oxford Street. Well, what does he sell? I don't know. And somebody at EMI sent a runner down Oxford Street, to people with suitcases. You Kenny Lynch? No, mate. You Kenny Lynch? No. I think it's that bloke down the road, third one down with a suitcase full of furry jumping spiders and cheap perfume. You Kenny Lynch? Yes, mate. What do you want? You got a hit record? Oh, come with me. Do the suitcase up, back to EMI, hit record. I mean, that's fun. That's exciting. It's so corporate now. It's boring.
Yeah. Cliff's a perfect example of someone who gets very little airplay, in fact, virtually no airplay anywhere. Even Radio 2 don't bother playing him these days, but still has his fans. And Daniel O'Donnell's, I think, the only other one that I can think of like Cliff that, regardless of whether he gets any TV, any radio or whatever, still sells out every single place he goes. And congratulations on coming up with the idea for this show, because it is a great show, and I know they're going to love it.
Yeah, well, I hope so. It seems so. The fans seem to really like it. And Cliff is pretty recession-proof, over 100 million records, our most successful artist ever, 130 hit singles. He's overtaken Elvis in this country. He's way ahead of the Beatles and everybody else. I mean, he's done phenomenally. He's got his OBE, he's got his knighthood. I mean, he's just quite exceptional. When he did Heathcliff, which was okay musical, and the critics slammed it, sold out every night, video number one for 20 weeks. I mean, as Cliff always says, he said, what do I have to do? How do you argue? If you were in the States, you'd be an absolute legend. Here, it's like, oh, Cliff Richard.
And I noticed this week there's another Channel 4 documentary trying to slam him and make all kind of allegations against him. It doesn't matter. The fans don't care. They won't watch it, will they?
No, in fact, it was quite a good piece. There's some good old rock and roll footage on, and it was like, the real Cliff Richard. And you think, well, there was nothing new about it. There were people on there saying nothing, and Peter Tatchell on there for gay rights. I thought, well, you might just well have had someone on there for heterosexual rights as well, for all the worth it was. I mean, it seemed pointless to me. The great thing was there's some nice old footage, but it was just a fairly average sort of program, really.
And whose business is it about his private life? He makes records. That's his job.
Yeah, that's right. But if you are going to do something like that, if you are saying, hey, we're doing an in-depth documentary about a private life, then do it. Talk to the person to himself, do an if you're going to do that, as people do it. But they didn't. I think it was a weak job. It was neither sort of fish nor fowl, really.
And come out and actually say it and have some evidence, because to me it was just sat there alleging that he was gay. That was the point of the programme. To me, it was just to knock him, really.
I thought that was pointless, because if you're with anybody, if you're going to do a programme and you're going to say, OK, we're doing a programme for whatever reason, whether the artist likes it or not, we've got all this, here's a documentary, we think you ought to know this, and we've done it. But they didn't. It was all intimated, and nobody said anything. Even Peter Tatchell said, well, I don't think you've got anything to go on here, really. So it's just all a bit. So you think, if I were the director, I wouldn't be too happy with that programme, because I would think the boss would come down and say, well, that was a bit limp. Do a documentary saying, a documentary on the great Cliff Richard, but on the real Cliff Richard, it wasn't.
Well, they made a documentary about Ken Dodd having tax problems not too long ago, and that was 14 years ago, and for some reason it filled an hour of TV. Who knows why they put it on. Mike Reid, it's a real pleasure talking to you today. Very finally, before I go, the voice of Cliff. It's so distinctive, and yours isn't a million miles away. It's an amazing kind of voice. Just do a little bit for us now. I mean, do you have to rehearse, or does it come naturally, or have you studied it?
No, it's like doing anybody, you see. I think you've just got to think yourself as a person. I mean, my voice is down here, and this is how I talk. But, if I was talking like Cliff, I would sort of talk something like that, because that's how he does it, And you do the mannerisms as well. But it's like anybody, if you're doing Bob Geldof, you've got to run your fingers through your hair. You've got to think you're Bob Geldof. And as it happens, you see, young lady, if you're doing Jimmy Savile, you have to think yourself as Jimmy Savile, you see. And if you're doing Rodney Buse from the Likely Lads, you've got to be hangdog like that and sort like that, you see, and say, it's all right for you, but I've got to stay at home and look after Thelma now, So it's whoever you're doing. If you do impressions, you think yourself into the person. I mean, I do a lot of Friends as well, and people always say, well, go do Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber. So I always do Tim talking in these dulcet tones, saying, it's all right for Andrew, because all he has to do is plonk out a few notes, and that tune will do for any musical. But of course, for a lyric doesn't transfer, and it's landlocked. And everything with that's what I do, because lyrics are they're very easy to write, and I find it extraordinary that you level those allegations at me.
I wish this was telly. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. The final question has to be, what does Cliff think?
He was bemused when I showed him a script when we were out in La Manga playing tennis, but he's been away. He doesn't come back, I think, until sort of just about now. So he'll probably come and see it next week or the week after, but all his office came in, all the Tennis Foundation came in, his sister came in the other night, and they all enjoyed it.
It's a real fun show. It's on at the Prince of Wales here in the West End of London. If you love Cliff, you're going to love the show. If you don't love Cliff, you're still going to enjoy it, because it's a real high-energy, fun show. And if you like the music that Cliff does and the Shadows do, and other people as well, you're going to love this show. Mike Reid, it's a real pleasure talking to you, and thanks for talking to us on the magic of the musicals on Broadway.
Good to be here.